Welcome, everybody, to a deep dive into Dharmveer Bharti's Gunahon Ka Devta. We're using an excerpt of the novel today, and it was originally in Hindi. You know, what really struck me was the characters and the intense relationships and societal pressures in the story. Bharti really weaves together this complex web of love and disillusionment and choices, especially I felt for the women in the story.
It is fascinating how he sets that stage, isn't it?
Hmm.
Placing these characters right at a crossroads, like their desires versus what society wants from them, especially in love and marriage.
Yeah.
Really just a recipe for turmoil.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I'm so curious how each character kind of responds to that pressure. So why don't we start with Chandar? He initially seems so idealistic, right? Like this young man devoted to Sudha. But then we see the shift, this descent into cynicism and detachment. What do you make of his transformation?
Well, Chandra's journey is really central to the whole thing, isn't it? His involvement with Pia, for instance, I think marks a turning point. She's described as alluring, but there's this lack of emotional depth to her. I feel like that relationship, the one with Pia, pushes Chandra further down that path of just being like totally disillusioned.
It's like he's looking for comfort in the physical, maybe as a way to avoid those like deeper emotional issues with Sudha.
Right.
And then we have this whole dynamic with Binti, Sudha's younger sister, which adds this whole other layer, right? It makes you question Chandra's motives. Like, where is that line?
It does. His interactions with Binti bring up a question. Well, the root of his transformation, what is it? Like, is it genuine pain driving him, a flawed understanding of love, or maybe he's deliberately going against societal norms? What do you think?
Well, that's tough to answer, right? Part of me wants to believe he's truly hurting, that his actions come from a place of love that isn't returned. But I don't know, there are times, especially with Binti, where it seems calculated, like he's purposely pushing those boundaries. What do you think Party's trying to do here with all this complexity?
I think he wants us, the readers, to look deeper into the characters, to really think about why people do things. Like, is Chandler just a product of his environment, a victim of what society tells him to do? Or is he making these choices to inflict pain on others? It's this ambiguity that makes him so interesting to analyze.
Totally. It's almost like he's reflecting those conflicting desires and moral dilemmas that young men of that time might have faced. Speaking of societal pressures, we can't forget about the weight of expectation on the women, too.
No, absolutely. The societal context really shapes their paths. Party beautifully portrays how they navigate love, sacrifice, and their own personal desires, all within the confines of a patriarchal society.
Right. And you see that so clearly with Sudha and her devotion to Chandar. It's really heartbreaking seeing her unwavering faith, even with all those challenges and Chandar pulling away.
It makes you wonder, though, where does that come from, this unwavering devotion? Is it naivety? A genuine belief in their shared ideals? Or maybe a deeper need for security and stability that marriage promises, even if it's unspoken?
That's a really good point, especially when you remember that Sudha was reluctant to get married in the first place. Remember how she said she wanted a life free from those societal constraints?
Right, that's crucial. It shows that inner conflict between her own wishes and what's expected of a young woman at that time.
And that scene where she removes her wedding bangles, just gut-wrenching.
It is.
It's not just the bangles, is it? It's like a symbol, stripping away not just those, but the hopes and dreams that came with them.
Absolutely. The bangles represent so much more than just an ornament. They're tied to all those societal expectations of marriage, the promises, the dreams people build around it.
It's like she's saying, look, these external markers mean nothing if the emotion isn't there. It's powerful.
Absolutely. A moment where she reclaims her own voice. A silent protest, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for sure.
It really speaks to her internal conflict, the clash between what she wants and the reality of her situation.
It reminds you that even in a society where women are often silenced, their actions can still speak volumes.
Absolutely. Party really makes us think about female agency within a patriarchal structure, a question that's still relevant today.
And when we think about those complexities, Sudha's sister, Binti, comes to mind. She's so quiet, watching everything play out, almost like a silent witness. What do you make of her character?
Binti's an interesting one, isn't she? Introverted and observant, but there's a real depth of understanding there and empathy, even with her quiet nature. Remember how she forms a bond with Pia?
Yeah, it's like she sees past the surface, right? Like they both have this shared pain. And when she comforts Chandar on Sudha's wedding night, when he's weeping, powerful.
It is.
What does that tell us about Binti?
I think it speaks volumes about her emotional maturity, her ability to empathize, even with someone who, let's face it, contributed to her sister's pain. She has emotional intelligence, maybe even more than Chandra himself,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too. It's like she sees through everyone's act and gets the pain they're hiding. It makes you wonder, will Binti, with all her quiet strength and sharp observation, break free from society's expectations and find her own way?
That's a question that really lingers. I think Party is hinting that Binti could transcend those limitations and make her own destiny. A little glimmer of hope in all this complexity.
For sure. And speaking of finding your own way, we can't overlook Pia. She's such a contrast to both Asuda and Binti. Confident, unconventional, and seemingly unaffected by societal expectations.
Pia's a force, wouldn't you say? Challenging those traditional norms with her independence. She's so open about her past relationships and her struggles, which is pretty bold considering everything. What'd you think of that?
It felt defiant, like she's refusing to be defined by societal judgments. And her singing, the raw emotion she pours into her music, it hints that under that carefree exterior, there's vulnerability. Remember the scene where she sings about unrequited love?
Yes, that was a poignant scene. That song really affects both Chandar and Sudha. It's a glimpse into her own experiences. Makes you wonder, is Pia really looking for genuine connection? Or is she using her charm to deal with a society that often pushes divorced women aside?
It's a great question, right? Is she using her charm as protection to shield herself from reality? Or is she really yearning for love and belonging under all that confidence?
I think Party wants us to consider both. Pia, like everyone else here, has many sides. She's a survivor, navigating a complex social landscape where her choices are limited by what others expect of her.
That's what makes her so compelling, right? She reminds us that even with all that pressure, women find ways to assert themselves, to make choices that go against expectations and shape their own lives.
Exactly. Through Pia, Party challenges how we judge and categorize women, urging us to look beyond the surface and recognize their strength and resilience.
Yeah, such a powerful message, especially when you think about all the female characters. Before we talk about Gaisu's story, what stands out to you about how Barty shows the societal pressures they face?
I think it's the subtle yet constant presence of those pressures. Barty doesn't preach, he just weaves those expectations into their everyday lives. It's in the whiskers, the looks, the unspoken rules, it's always there, shaping their choices and ultimately their fates.
You're right, it's like the air they breathe, dictating what they can or cannot do, who they love, what future they can dream of. And you see this so clearly in Gaisu's story, which serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of those pressures.
Absolutely. Gacy's tale is heartbreaking. It shows what happens when you defy the norms, especially as a woman. It's a descent into heartbreak and isolation.
It's tough, right? We see her joy in marriage, then this painful separation, and society turns on her for simply being divorced.
The stigma is real, limiting her options and pushing her to the margins. It's like this cruel paradox. Society celebrates marriage, but then punishes those who don't live up to its ideals.
It is a paradox, a tragic one. Party seems to be showing us different sides of love and heartbreak, how society dictates our paths, and that inner turmoil we feel trying to balance our desires with those expectations.
That's a very perceptive observation.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Party's trying to explore in Gunahon Ka Devta. These intricate questions of love, disillusionment, the weight of societal expectations, and the courage it takes to break free.
It makes you examine your own beliefs about love and relationships and the forces that shape our lives, doesn't it?
Definitely.
Have we managed to understand things a little better in this first part of our deep dive?
I think so. We've looked at the characters' internal struggles, how society weighs on them, and the ways their choices, whether forced or freely made, affect their lives. There's more to uncover, though.
Sure.
More to dive into.
Absolutely. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll do just that. We're going to look at how Party uses symbols, these little recurring details that add layers of meaning to this complex story. Stay with us.
Welcome back. As we go further into Gunahon Ka Devta, it's amazing how Party uses simple moments between characters to show those bigger societal things at work.
Yeah, for sure. It's like he's zooming in on those everyday moments, those little conversations that seem basic but really reveal so much about what's going on inside the characters and the limits society puts on them.
Exactly.
It's subtle, but so effective.
It really is. Take, for example, that talk between Sudha and Chandar. When she's telling him not to marry her, she even mentions her family wants her to marry somebody else. What did you think about that?
I was surprised, honestly. Here she is, so in love with Chandar, and yet she's ready to give up her own happiness to follow her family's wishes. Says a lot about what was expected of women then, right?
Oh, absolutely. Marriage wasn't just about love. It was about family, social standing, and security, especially for women. Sudha being willing to step aside to put Chandra's ideals above her own happiness. It's admirable, but also kind of tragic.
It is, and it makes you wonder if Chandra even gets how big of a sacrifice that is. I mean, he's dealing with his own sense of duty, what he thinks is right, but there's also a kind of um, self-centeredness to his actions, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there's this tension between his guilt and confusion, right? He wants to do right by Sudha, but he's also fighting with his own feelings. Almost like he's trapped, can't really grasp how his choices affect those around him.
And then there's Binti in the middle of all this. It feels like she's the only one who really sees everything, all the unspoken pain. But she doesn't say anything, just watches. What do you think Harti's doing with her silence?
I think it's a powerful statement in itself. It represents how many young women back then had no voice, how they had to follow society's rules, even if it hurt them. It's like a silent protest, a way of rebelling against what everyone expects of her.
Wow, that's a really beautiful way to put it. It's not that she's passive. It's a form of resistance, protecting herself in a world that's trying to control her.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenging those norms, Pia comes to mind. An outsider, facing judgment for being divorced, but she still connects with people, even if it's on a physical level.
P is so interesting because she's different from what was expected of women. Her defiance, her independence, and how open she is about her sexuality, it all challenges those societal norms. She won't be shamed or silenced.
It's like she's saying, you can't define me with your narrow ideas of what a woman should be. Her relationship with Chandra is so different from what he has with Sudha. It's more physical, passionate, but not as fulfilling in the end. Why do you think that is?
I think it shows how complex human desire is and how we look for connection in different ways. Chandra's drawn to Pia physically, maybe to get away from all the emotional stuff with Sudha, like a break from all the pressure, societal and otherwise.
Like he's finding comfort in something superficial, a way to avoid those feelings.
Yeah.
Then there's Gesu, and her story is just this heartbreaking example of what happens when society's rules collide with personal choices. She loses her husband, her home, everything, and she's left to rebuild her life. It really shows you what can happen when you go against the grain.
Gesu's story really highlights what divorce meant for women, the social stigma. It's so ingrained in society, limiting their choices and making them outcasts. It's cruel, isn't it? Society pushes marriage, but then punishes those who don't fit the ideal.
Yeah, such a cruel paradox. Parties showing us all these sides of love and heartbreak, how society shapes our choices, and how hard it is to balance what we want with what's expected of us.
Exactly. Through these characters, we see the price of conforming to social norms, but also the power of love, even when it ends tragically. They represent a society trying to change, holding on to traditions, and dealing with what happens when you break the rules.
Like a tapestry, with threads of love and disillusionment and sacrifice and resilience. Each character brings a different perspective to the story. I'm curious, though, about how Party uses symbols to add to these themes. It seems like he uses them to represent the character's struggles and the things that hold them back.
That's a great point. He's very good at using symbols to make the story deeper. Like, for instance, the rose. It pops up throughout the novel and has all these different meanings.
Roses. Honestly, that one surprised me. They seem so, simple, innocent. What could they possibly represent in a story like this?
Well, for Chandra's brother-in-law, they represent his love and grief for his wife who passed away. It's a symbol of love lasting beyond death. But for Pia, they become this symbol of rebellion, of going against those rules that condemn her.
Wow, I didn't see that. The same object meaning totally different things to different characters.
It's clever, right?
Yeah.
It highlights how their experiences are so unique.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not just the roses. The bangles Sudha takes off, they symbolize her broken dreams and the societal chains that hold her back.
That scene is just heartbreaking.
It is.
She's not just taking off bangles, she's shedding expectations. What other symbol stood out to you?
Even singing, especially with Pia, becomes symbolic. It's how she releases her emotions, a way to express herself in a society that tries to silence her. A powerful way of rebelling, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. She's reclaiming her voice through music, expressing feelings that society says are wrong for a woman to show, especially if she's divorced. These symbols help us understand the characters better, what they're going through deep down, and the forces they're fighting against.
Exactly. We see more than just the surface story and grasp how complicated their experiences are. It's like Porty's giving us a secret code to crack the novel's real meaning. What do you think about that?
I love that. We have a key to unlock a hidden door, to see those deepy truths Parti's exploring. Makes the whole experience so much richer. And speaking of deeper truths, we can't forget how powerful Parti's writing is. Those incredible passages, the dialogue, they really capture the characters and their struggles.
Absolutely. His writing is full of vivid imagery and dialogue that makes you think.
Yeah.
It pulls you right into their world. Remember that talk between Sudha and her friend Gesu about love and heartbreak?
Yeah, that one really got to me, especially when Gaisu talks about how your heart can be tricked into thinking it's not attached to anyone, and then bam, everything changes. It's such a great metaphor for how vulnerable love is and how much heartbreak hurts.
It's beautiful, right? Showing how unpredictable love is, how easily we can be fooled, almost like foreshadowing for Sudha's own heartbreak to come.
It is. And when Chandra criticizes how emotional Sudhis is about their separation, he's trying to be all intellectual about it, to distance himself from his own feelings.
Exactly. He's aware of himself in that moment, but he can't face the emotional fallout of what he's done. So focused on his own struggles that he doesn't see how much he's hurting others.
It's interesting how Party doesn't shy away from showing us the characters' flaws. They feel real, relatable, We see their strengths and weaknesses, their clarity and their self-deception.
Definitely. And by showing us these raw, honest portraits, we understand the human condition better, those struggles we all have with love and loss and expectations. We see ourselves in their stories, their wins and losses.
Speaking of relatable, what are your thoughts on Binti's journey? She's so quiet, always thinking. Are there any passages that stand out to you?
A few, actually.
Yeah.
Remember when Binti comforts Chandar, who's crying on Sudha's wedding night? Her quiet empathy shows so much about her, hinting at a depth that maybe even Chandar doesn't have.
That scene is just so powerful. She sees through everything and gets the pain they're all hiding.
Hmm.
Her silence is like a strength, a
Yeah,
way of experiencing their world without judging.
it is. There's also that scene where she shares her own experiences with love and loss, things that Chandar, caught up in himself, completely missed. It's a small moment, but significant.
Oh, yeah. It's like she's challenging his view of women, making him see them as more than just their societal roles. She wants to be seen, to be heard, even in her quiet way.
Exactly. Through those small moments, Party shows us Binti's quiet strength and the possibility of her own awakening. Like she's on the verge of something big, a journey to discover herself and go beyond the limitations of her world.
Like a seed being planted, a chance for growth and change waiting to happen.
Hmm.
It gives me hope for her. But what about the others, like Chandar and Sudha? Do you think there's hope for them?
That's a question that stays with you, doesn't it? Especially as we reach the end of the excerpt. Party leaves us feeling unsettled, with so many unanswered questions. The ending doesn't wrap things up neatly.
It doesn't. It's like he wants us to think about the possibilities, to imagine what happens to the characters after the story ends.
Exactly. The novel doesn't give us easy answers. It makes us face the messy reality of relationships and the impact of society's rules.
So, where does that leave us? What have we learned from this deep dive into Gunahon Ka Devta so far?
For me, it's a reminder that love, in all its forms, is powerful. It can lift you up or tear you down. It reminds us how society pushes us to make certain choices, and what happens when those choices go against what we really want.
It's a story that makes you think, makes you question things, and makes you appreciate how complex relationships really are. We're not done yet, though, are we? There's more to explore.
There is. In the last part of our deep dive, we're going to look at that ending, the one that leaves us with so many questions. We'll talk about what it could mean, the different ways to interpret it, and what it tells us about the characters' futures and the lasting power of societal forces.
I'm ready. Stick with us as we keep exploring the depths of Gunahon Ka Devta.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Gunahon Ka Devta. You know, we've covered so much, the character struggles, the symbolism, those societal pressures, but it's that ending, the way Party leaves things so open, that's really stuck with me.
Yeah, it doesn't give us easy answers, does it? It's like he wants us to keep thinking about it. Exactly. He wants us to figure out what happens next, beyond the excerpt. So, what were your first impressions of the ending? What really stood out to you?
I think it's that unsettled feeling, the questions that are left unanswered. Like Party's saying that life doesn't always have clear endings. We deal with the consequences of choices, ours and other people's, long after the story's over.
It's true. And that feeling is even stronger when you think about what happens to Chandar. We talked about how he changes, his flaws, his struggles. But I keep wondering, can he find redemption? Is there any hope for him?
It's a question that hangs over everything, right? And I think it shows how good Party is at creating characters. Chandar isn't just a good guy or a bad guy. He's complicated, driven by good intentions and selfish desires. His journey is like the human struggle to match our ideals with what we actually do.
Right, he's always looking for something, meaning, connection, but what he does often goes against what he says. So do you think someone like him can actually change, break free from that cycle of disappointment and pain?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The novel doesn't tell us for sure. It makes us think about redemption, even for someone as flawed as Chandar, but it doesn't promise anything.
It's like Party saying redemption is a process, not a finish line. You have to be self-aware, willing to face your flaws, and really want to change. But even then, there's no guarantee of forgiveness or a clean slate.
I agree. And maybe that's the point. Life's messy. You can't predict it, and it rarely gives you easy answers. Redemption, just like love, is complicated. You need to look inward, be humble, and want to make things right. But in the end, it's up to each person to choose if they're going on that journey.
It's a powerful message, and it goes beyond the book, doesn't it? It reminds us we're all capable of good and bad, growth and staying stuck. Our choices, our actions, they shape our lives.
They do. And that might be the most important thing we take away from Gunahon Ka Devta. It's a story that makes us look at ourselves, our own complexities, our flaws, and try to be better, even when things are hard and uncertain.
It sticks with you, makes you think, makes you question, and makes you appreciate how complicated human relationships are.
It does.
Well, I think we've really dug deep into Gunahon Ka Devta, haven't we? We've explored the characters, the symbols, that open ending that leaves us with so much to think about.
It's been a fascinating journey peeling back the layers of this amazing work. I hope people listening feel like picking up Gunahon Ka Devta and exploring Parti's world themselves.
I hope so too. And keep thinking about those questions we talked about today. What does redemption really mean? Can we escape those societal limits? What happens because of the choices we make? Let those questions guide you as you read Gunahon Ka Devta. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep those curious minds going.